Somewhere beneath the ground, right now, a worker ant may be walking toward the entrance of its nest for the very last time. No one called her. No one pushed her outside. Yet somehow, through biological mechanisms science is still working to understand, her behavior changes as she reaches the final stage of her life. And what happens next is very different from what most of us imagine when we think about death in the animal world. There is no funeral, no ceremony, no visible mourning. But there is also no neglect. Instead, there is a silent and remarkably efficient system that treats death as one more event that must be managed for the survival of something much larger, the colony. To understand the final day of an ant, we first need to understand the life that came before it. Biologist Edward O. Wilson, one of the most influential researchers in the study of ants and a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, described ant colonies as something similar to a superorganism. Instead of thinking about each ant as a completely independent animal, imagine the entire colony functioning almost like one living body. Each ant performs a specific role, much like different parts of a larger biological system, and the differences between their lifespans can be enormous. Depending on the species, an ant queen may live for 10, 20, or even 30 years. Worker ants, on the other hand, usually live far shorter lives, often ranging from several months to a few years, depending on the species and environmental conditions. And during that time, a worker ant's job does not necessarily remain the same. In many ant species, work changes with age. This phenomenon is known as age-related polyethism. Young workers often remain deep inside the nest, caring for eggs, larvae, and pupae, feeding the queen, cleaning the nest, and maintaining chambers. It is one of the safest places an ant can work. Inside, she is protected from rain, extreme temperatures, predators, and rival colonies. But as the worker becomes older, her responsibilities often change. She may begin working closer to the outer sections of the nest, later participate in defense, and eventually become a forager. That means leaving the colony to search for food. And suddenly, life becomes much more dangerous. Outside the nest, an ant may encounter spiders, birds, lizards, other insects, flooding, extreme heat, rival ants, or simply exhaustion. From the perspective of the colony, this arrangement is extremely efficient. Younger workers still have a large amount of potential work ahead of them, while older workers have already contributed for much longer and statistically have less remaining lifespan. So placing older ants in more dangerous roles helps reduce the risk of losing younger workers that may still provide months of future labor. Scientists have documented patterns like this in several ant groups. It is not a conscious decision made by the colony. There is no manager assigning jobs. Instead, the behavior emerges from biological signals, age, hormones, chemical communication, and interactions between thousands or sometimes millions of ants. But what happens when an ant does not die outside? What if she is not eaten by a predator? What if she simply becomes weak, sick, or dies somewhere inside the nest? This is where the story becomes even stranger. A dead insect inside a warm, crowded colony can become a serious sanitary risk. As the body begins to break down, it can become associated with microorganisms, fungi, parasites, and other threats. So ants possess a remarkable sanitation behavior known as necrophoresis. When an ant dies, chemical changes begin taking place in its body. Other workers detect certain chemical signals associated with the corpse, pick up the dead ant, and carry it away from important areas of the nest. In some species, dead ants and other waste are deposited in specific disposal areas outside or near the colony. These areas are sometimes described as ant cemeteries, although there is no ceremony involved. They are essentially waste management zones. One of the most famous demonstrations of this behavior came from experiments associated with Edward O. Wilson's research. Scientists found that certain chemicals associated with dead insects, including oleic acid, could trigger corpse removal behavior. And this led to one of the strangest experiments in ant research. When researchers placed these chemical signals onto living ants, other workers sometimes treated them as if they were dead. The living ant could move, struggle, and clearly be alive, yet its nestmates would still attempt to carry it toward the disposal area. In some cases, the ant would return, only to be carried away again because the chemical signal was still present. Why? Because ants do not necessarily identify death the way humans do. They rely heavily on chemical information. To the colony, the chemical signal can matter more than the fact that the ant is still moving. And this reveals something extraordinary. Many behaviors that look highly organized do not require every ant to understand the entire system. An individual ant follows relatively simple biological and chemical rules. Yet when thousands of ants follow those rules together, the result can look incredibly sophisticated. But removing dead ants is only part of the story. Researchers have also observed something even more surprising in some species. Sick or dying ants may isolate themselves. One well-known study examined ants of the species Temnothorax unifasciatus. Researchers observed that some workers approaching death left the social area of the nest and separated themselves from the colony. No other ant needed to drag them out. In certain cases, the sick worker itself increased its distance from the colony. This behavior can have an important protective effect. If an infected or seriously ill ant dies away from the main colony, pathogens may have fewer opportunities to spread to healthy workers, larvae, or the queen. Scientists study behaviors like this as part of what is called social immunity. Ants may clean each other, remove contaminated material, isolate infected individuals, and move corpses away from the nest. Different species use different strategies, but the function is similar: reducing the spread of disease and protecting the colony as a whole. So the final day of a worker ant may end in several very different ways. She may die while defending the nest. She may disappear during a foraging trip and never return. She may become exhausted somewhere far from home. She may become sick inside the nest and later be carried away by other workers. Or, in certain species and circumstances, she may distance herself from the colony before death. And almost none of this requires the kind of conscious understanding humans associate with death. There is no evidence that ants hold funerals or understand personal loss in the human sense. Much of their social organization depends on instinct, chemical signals, and relatively simple behavioral rules. Yet the result is astonishingly effective. For the colony, the individual worker is not the center of the story. What matters biologically is the continuation of the nest, the protection of the queen and larvae, and the functioning of the colony as a whole. Food is still collected. Larvae are still fed. Tunnels are still maintained. The queen continues laying eggs. New workers replace old ones. And the colony continues, sometimes for years, beyond the lifespan of a single worker. That is perhaps the most fascinating part of the story. For humans, an individual life is central. We remember people. We mourn them. We preserve their names and stories. An ant colony functions according to a radically different biological system. A single worker may disappear without changing the colony very much at all. Yet her work contributed to something that can continue long after she is gone. The tunnels she helped maintain remain. The larvae she helped feed become new workers. The food she collected supports the colony. And when her life ends, even the removal of her body becomes part of the colony's system of protection. There is something almost philosophical about that contrast. Human societies place enormous importance on the individual. Ant colonies, by comparison, operate through a system in which the survival of the collective matters far more biologically than the survival of any single worker. Not because an ant makes a conscious sacrifice, but because the colony is organized around collective survival. So beneath our feet, hidden inside the soil, thousands of tiny lives are constantly beginning and ending. No ceremony, no announcement, no visible mourning. Just a silent biological system continuing its work. And once you understand that, an ordinary anthill suddenly feels much less ordinary. If this look into the hidden world of ants made you see them differently, leave a like and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. It really helps the channel continue bringing you fascinating science.